Psalms.
All right.
We're going to be in Psalm 90.
All right.
Psalm 90. When you get there, please let me know today by saying amen. Psalm 90.
Amen.
Starting in verse 9. And of course, I'll be reading out the ESV. And it says, "For all our days pass away under your wrath. We bring our years to an end like a sigh. The years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength 80, yet their span is but toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away.
Wow.
Who considers the power of your anger and your wrath according to the fear of you? So, teach us to number our days,
Amen.
that we may get a heart of wisdom."
Amen.
Right now.
For the next few moments in this last Sunday of the year, I want to speak to you from the subject, life is short and God is watching. Will you just tell your neighbor, life is short and God is watching. The psalm that we read this morning is different from most psalms, many psalms, because its author is not David, it's Moses.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Moses, the man whom God used to deliver his people out of bondage in Egypt, gives us this prayer in Psalm 90, which is eloquent, profound, and one of the oldest psalms in the entire book of Psalms. And if you're going to understand fully the context of this particular psalm, you must understand the Exodus story. The story of the Israelites' exodus out of bondage in Egypt and their subsequent journey to the Promised Land. Because this particular psalm was written near the tail end of Israel's wilderness wanderings.
All right. Come on.
As they languished under God's judgment on their way to Canaan.
All right.
Some of you might know this story.
Amen.
It was only supposed to be an 11-day journey.
Yeah.
The journey from Egypt to Canaan was only supposed to take 11 days.
All right now.
But what was supposed to take 11 days ended up taking 40 years.
Yes.
40 years, because God was punishing his own people
Come on with it.
for their murmuring, their complaining,
That's right.
and their rebellion.
Yes.
And it took 40 years
Yes.
for the entire generation that behaved that way
That's right.
to die off in order for the new generation to
Bring it on.
enter
Come on.
into the Promised Land.
Well.
Right.
So Moses pens this profound prayer as he's at the tail end of this wilderness wandering period. And you have to imagine that Moses is looking out and he's seeing a lot of people dying off.
Well.
Yes.
He's looking out and he's basically seeing the extinction of an entire generation. And as he's looking out and seeing these people that he walked with, these people that he led, and these people that he knew by name, as he's looking out and he's seeing them die one by one, Moses begins to ponder the brevity and the fragility of life. You can see that reflected in verse 9. Listen to verse 9 again. Moses writes, for all our days pass away under your wrath. We bring our years to end like a sigh. The King James Version reads a little bit differently. The King James Version says, we spend our years as a tale that is told. Whenever there's a discrepancy of this sort between the King James Version and the English Standard Version, what we need to do is we got to go back to the original Hebrew.
All right.
Moses is not writing these words in English. He's writing these words in Hebrew. And whenever there's a translation issue between the KJV and the ESV, we got to go back and look at the Hebrew. And the Hebrew word for the word tale in the King James Version, the Hebrew word for the word sigh in the English Standard Version is the word hege. Hege. And that word has a range of meaning, but essentially it means a moaning. It means a murmuring. Or it means to sigh. Which is why the ESV says, we bring our years to end like a sigh. Let me help you to understand it this way. Let me illustrate it this way. Everybody take a deep breath in. Now let it out. All right? In the same way that it took just a moment for you to inhale and sigh out, Moses is saying the lives of the children of Israel and subsequently our own lives are just as fleeting, just as transitory,
All right.
and just as quick as the sigh that we just let out our mouth.
All right.
Moses is saying, just like a sigh or a thought or a murmur is quick, so is life quick as well.
Come on, teach, Pastor.
Think about it this way. The woman in recent history, relatively recent history, to live the longest was a woman in France who lived to be 122 years old.
Have mercy.
Okay.
122 years. That's a long time.
Yes, it is.
Particularly when average life expectancy is late 70s, early 80s. 122 years. Seems like a long time. Until you start to study a creature called the red coral sea turtle.
Come on.
The red coral sea turtle can live up to 500 years.
Okay.
So the red coral sea turtle scoffs and laughs at the 122 years of the lady in France.
Well,
But before the red coral sea turtle can scoff and laugh and boast, there are redwood trees in California
all right.
that can live to be over 2,000 years old.
Have mercy.
All right then.
So the redwood trees look at the turtle and look at the human being and say 122 years is all you got. 500 years is all you got.
Come on.
We can live up to 2,000 years,
Well,
and that seems like a long time.
Well.
2,000 years, 500 years, 122 years seems like a long time until you realize that 1,000 years is as one day to the Lord. 122 years, 500 years, 2,000 years is a drop in the eternal bucket. In the scheme of things, your live 122 years is really infinitesimal. Yes, I said infinitesimal. That's an SAT word. Write it down, kids. It's small. All I'm saying to you this morning is life is short. David echoes what Moses says here in Psalm 144. David says, man is like a breath.
Well,
His days are like a passing shadow. The Apostle James comes in as a third witness. In James chapter 4, verse 14, James says, our life is a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. And the reason why we shouldn't idolize this life, the reason why we shouldn't esteem this life as the greatest thing, the reason why we shouldn't place this little tiny life we have upon this huge pedestal is because in the grand scheme of things, no matter how you live, life is still rolling on faster than you can. And you know who normally has the most difficult time grasping this concept? Young people.
Well,
All my young people in here, listen up. Because you guys are normally the ones that think that you have all the time in the world. When you're young, you normally think that you're going to have the next 10 years, the next 20 years to do whatever it is that you have to do. And how many seasoned saints can admit that when you're young, you tend to take time for granted?
great,
But
Pastor.
are there any seasoned saints that can testify to these young saints? And let them know that you might be young now. But before you know it, you're going to blink your eye. And that beautiful black on your head is going to start to turn gray. Before you blink your eye, your ability to walk briskly will turn into an ability to barely get around the house. Before you blink your eye, your nice little shape might turn into a 40 or a 50 waist. Before you know it, the skin that's clinging tight to your bone.
Great.
Gonna look in the mirror, it's gonna be hanging in places that you never knew it could hang. And all I'm telling you this morning, whether you're living the life of a king or whether you're living the life of a pauper, life is short. Whether you're living the life of a saint or whether you're living the life of a sinner, life is short. Whether you're living the life of an owner or you're living the life of an employee, life is short. Can you just touch your neighbor and tell your neighbor, don't be fooled. You don't have a whole lot of time.
Great, Pastor. Great. Tell it.
Moses, in our text, not only emphasizes the brevity of life,
All right now, Pastor.
but in the very next verse, in verse 10, he emphasizes the hardship
Come on now.
that comes along with this brief life.
Yes, sir.
Because Moses says in verse 10, the years of our life are 70. If you read the King James Version, 80 years and 10 is 70. Okay? He says 70, or even by reason of strength, 80.
Yes, sir.
That's what 80 years means. 80 years is 8 years.
Yes.
He says, yet their span is but toil and trouble. The King James says, yet is their strength, labor, and sorrow. They are soon gone. The King James Version says, for it is soon cut off, and we fly away.
Have mercy.
Well,
Have mercy.
In verse 9, Moses focuses on the brevity of life. And then in verse 10, he says that there are some hardships that come along with this brief life that we have. And he says, King James Version, what comes along with this brief life is labor and sorrow.
Well,
The English Standard Version says toil and trouble. That word labor in the King James Version essentially means wearisome work. Wearisome work. Listen, Macedonia, did you know that the average person spends, listen to this, spends 13 years and 2 months working?
well,
years and 2 months. If you live to be 80, that is nearly 20% of your life. A little over 16% to be exact. 13 years. 13 years of your life clocking in and clocking out.
Have mercy.
13 years of your life having to manage crazy people and deal with employee conflict. 13 years of your life doing back-breaking construction or working manual labor. 13 years of your life making copies and creating spreadsheets. 13 years of your life working wearily. But not only does life come with labor, but life also comes with sorrow.
Have mercy.
Listen, if you came this morning for a sermon that would pass out candy and goodies, and if you came this morning for your ears to be tickled, touch somebody and say, you're in the wrong place. That's the wrong pastor if you want your ears tickled. Sorrow. See, the longer you live, the more your body begins to break down.
Preach.
The longer you live, the more you begin to see your friends and your loved ones pass away before you. And you don't know deep sorrow until your grandmama goes, or your grandfather goes, or your mama goes, or your daddy goes, or your brother goes, or your sister goes. Sorrow. And the longer you live, the more you see sin corrupt this culture. The way that things are today. Can I get a seasoned saint in here that can say that the craziness of this world today is on a level that it wasn't 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago? Is there anybody that can say, I have seen sin increase in this world more than I ever even imagined? Sorrow, sorrow. And then the text says, after the labor. Come on. And after the sorrow. It comes to an end.
Yes, sir.
And then we fly away.
Well,
And Macedonia, as we stand on the cusp of a new year, I like to lift texts like this up. Because texts like this, it puts everything into perspective. Because this is normally the time of the year where we are so engulfed in planning and prognosticating and creating vision. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for planning. Just in November, we had a planning session where we planned out the entire year. I'm all for planning. And I'm all for prognosticating. And I'm all for creating a vision. But we shouldn't get so consumed looking into the future that we forget to look over our shoulder and give God praise still here. Oh my God. I dare you to touch about 3 people and tell them you're looking at a miracle. You're looking at a miracle. God did this. God did this. I'm not here by might. I'm not here by power. But I'm here by His Spirit. You're looking at a picture of grace. You made it. Celebrate God. Give glory to God. Because you're still here.
That's good preaching.
Moses in Psalm 90 doesn't just help us to have a right view of next year, but he helps us to have the right view of all of life. And he helps us to have the right view of the Almighty Eternal God. Because he continues, look with me, he continues in verse 11. And he says, who considers the power of your anger and your wrath
Have mercy.
according to the fear
Well,
of you? The King James reads differently. The King James says, who knoweth the power of thy anger, even according to thy fear, so is thy wrath. Ooh. Moses here in verse 11 mentions 2 things. One is a powerful attribute of God, and the other is the proper response to this powerful attribute of God. Moses mentions God's powerful anger and wrath. And then he mentions fear. Fear of God, which is the correct and proper response when you understand the powerful anger and wrath of God. See, Moses was a man that was well acquainted with the power and the anger and the wrath of God. Because way back in Exodus 32, Moses was atop Mount Sinai. Because Moses was atop Mount Sinai, the children of Israel down below got tired of waiting for him to come down. So they built a golden calf. They started worshiping it. God saw him. He got angry. He got upset. He got so upset that he called his own people stiff-necked. And God spoke of consuming his own people. Moses recognized that God was angry. And he implored the Lord and spared the lives of the Israelites. Moses knew about God's wrath and God's anger. As a matter of fact, as the children of Israel wandered in the wilderness, a 40-year journey which should have taken 11 days, every time they woke up in the desert instead of the promised land, that was a reminder to them they were under God's wrath. Moses knew about God's anger and God's wrath. And as a result, Moses, he was a God-fearing man. He feared God.
Yes, sir.
But Moses also knew, listen, Macedonian, Moses also knew that his fear of God had a limit. He knew that his fear of God had an extent, because Moses says at the end of verse 11, this is how the ESV says it, and your wrath according to the fear of you. The KJV says it like this, even according to thy fear, so is thy wrath. So Moses is saying, though one's fear for God may be much, God's wrath, listen, is far greater than any fear one may have for him. You do know, Macedonia, that it's possible to fear something. And that thing that you're fearing not necessarily be as big as your fear.
Well, right.
You might fear a bully. But then when that bully comes at you, and you two-piece the bully, and make quick work of the bully, and send the bully running, you quickly realize that your great fear of the bully was bigger than the bully's ability to hurt you and harm you. So that is a clear example of how the fear of something could be greater than the thing that you are fearing. But this is not the case with God. It doesn't matter how much you fear God. No amount of fear that man can muster, can supersede, can grow larger than the anger and the wrath of God. I know that these aren't popular topics to talk about on the cusp of New Year's Eve. I know that this isn't, a run around the church. This isn't a roll on the floor. God's going to give you 10 million blessings type of sermon. But this is what we need to hear. This is God we're talking about. Y'all know I love Charles Spurgeon. I quote him all the time. Sometimes I like quoting the old guys because their use of the language is the best. He said, listen. He said, beware ye if you forget God, lest he tear you in pieces and there be none to deliver. Who is able to stand against this justly angry God? Who will dare to rush upon the bosses of his buckler or tempt the edge of his sword? Be it ours to submit ourselves as dying sinners to this eternal God who can, even at this moment, command us to the dust and thence to hell. Verse 11 helps us to avoid and ignore all the hype that's usually associated with this time of year. Because normally during New Year's, the world and the church is telling us to live life with our goals in view. And again, let me restate, I am not anti-goal. We need to make goals and plan. I am not anti-goal and anti-planning. I'm simply saying that as I read verse 11 of Psalm 90, I'm reminded that before we need to live with our goals in view, we need to live with our God in view. It is possible to see goals correctly and not see God correctly. And we don't need to put the cart before the horse. Right now, at this moment, we need to ensure that we are seeing God correctly. Because if we can see God correctly, the goals will fall into place. But first, we need to see God correctly. When you see God correctly, you won't need to make a New Year's resolution to break your bad habits. Because you'll be so aware of God's displeasure and punishing of sin that you'll be willing to deny yourself before you deny your God. When you have the correct view of God, you won't need a New Year's resolution to treat people right. Because you realize that people are created in God's image. So to disrespect and mistreat God's God who is powerful, this God who has attributes of anger and wrath, he sees us. So we got to ensure that we're seeing him. Because rest assured that his eyes are going to and fro. His eyes can see us when we're sleeping. His eyes can see us when we're awake. He knows. Okay, all right.
Preach, sir. Don't let go.
That's all right.
Let him have his way.
This
All right.
is the God of Scripture.
Yeah. Good preaching, Pastor. Good preaching.
And when you see God correctly, it'll help you to pray correctly. Because Moses, in our text, after he talks about how short life is,
Well,
after he talks about the hardships that come with this short life,
well,
and after he reminds us of God's powerful anger and wrath, he then, in verse 12, asks this God to teach something.
Amen.
Look at verse 12. I'm still in the text. He says, so teach us to number our days, that we may get a heart of wisdom.
All right.
The King James Version says that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. Moses here is praying, Lord, because life is fragile, and because life is frail, and because life is fleeting, teach me not to waste the days that I have before me.
well,
He's praying, Lord, instruct us on how to consider the brevity of life and the speediness of death. He's saying, Lord, just because we've made it this far, help us to realize that just because we're here, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden life is not short and that every moment does not matter.
Well,
Will you help me, Macedonia, real quick? Emphasize the point that Moses is making here. Will you tell your neighbor, you've got to count every day
yes, sir. Yes,
because
sir.
every day counts.
Preach, Pastor. Preach.
You got to, I'm going to say that one more time. You got to count every day because every day counts. Not only does every day count, but every minute counts. Not only does every minute count, but every second counts. Not only does every second count, but every hour counts. And I don't have time to waste my time on frivolous, meaningless, stupid things. There's an eternity up ahead. And I'm going to live on earth in view of eternity.
All right. Good preaching, Pastor. Good preaching. Good preaching.
I'm not going to waste time. Moses' aim, listen to me, Moses' aim in asking God for this instruction is because he wants himself and the people to grow a heart of wisdom. He wants them to apply wisdom. Essentially, Moses is saying, Lord, teach us to number our days because we don't want to just grow older, we want to grow wiser. You do know that just because you're growing older, that doesn't necessarily mean you're growing wiser. You can probably think about 3 or 4 old fools you know. 3 or 4 people who are old, but they think today just like they did when they were 17. And so Macedonia, is there about 5 or 6 people in here this morning that can say, I don't just want to grow older, but I want to grow wiser. who counts their days and not worried about the frivolous cares of this world. Not worried about the fleeting passions that this culture tries to entice you to chase. The person that counts their days with the correct view of God in mind will grow wiser. And when you're counting your days and growing wiser, then you realize that the emphasis doesn't so much need to be on how you talk. And it doesn't necessarily even, the emphasis doesn't necessarily even need to be on how much you know. But the emphasis needs to be on what you do. What you do with the time that you have. The last I checked, wisdom is not about what you say. And wisdom is not even about what you know. Wisdom is about what you do with what you say and what you know. If you say a whole lot and know a whole lot, but that doesn't translate into what you do, then you might be smart, but you're not wise. I'm getting excited. My voice is starting to crack like I'm 13 again. But that's okay. It's good. It's good news. I want to grow in wisdom. And listen, Macedonia, because life is short and God is watching, I want to be wise. I want to be like Solomon, who doesn't place my concern on the concerns and the cares of this culture and world. But I look to Jesus, the author and the finisher of my faith. Because life is short and God is watching, I want a wise heart. And let me tell you about a wise heart. The wise heart doesn't waste time holding grudges. It's time to leave all the petty grudges. Back in 2018, I know they hurt you, and I know they made you cry. But the wise heart says pleasing God is more important than holding this grudge against my brother or my sister. So because life is short and God is watching, I'm going to make haste to reconcile with my brother or my sister. The wise heart doesn't waste time on selfish and vain pursuits. Oh, in 2019, more than I want my will, I want God's will. Because God's will for my life is better than my wildest dream. In 2019, it's not about my party and my life. It's about God and His glory and His will being done in and through all I am. Is there anybody that can say, I want what God wants? I want God to be glorified. I want God to be magnified. I want God to be exalted. I'm not worried. The wise heart doesn't waste time making excuses. You got to leave the excuses. Back in 2018, excuse after excuse as to why you had to join the choir. Excuse after excuse as to why you hadn't answered the calling. I'm so thankful for next weekend, because next weekend is a moment for Deacon Knox where he is leaving the excuses behind. And he is saying, God has called me to this. God has called me to that. And it's for God I live and for God I die. Touch your neighbor and tell him it's time out for excuses. You've got a gift that God wants to use. You've got a calling that God wants you to walk in. You've got a ministry in your heart. Time out. The wise heart doesn't waste time playing in church. I'm going to say it again. The wise heart doesn't waste time playing in church. Macedonia in 2019, I don't just want to come to church, but I want to come to see God. Look, I don't care about all the tradition. I don't care about all the routine. I want to have every time that I'm in here an encounter with the living God. I want my worship and my praise to be pure. I don't just want to talk this thing. I want to live this thing. Because in 2019 I don't have time to play church. Playing church is over. Getting dressed up and acting holy is over. Trying to act like you're so sanctified is over. Is there anybody in here that wants to talk like Jesus and walk like Jesus and live like Jesus and pray like Jesus? Because life is short and God is watching. I want a wise heart. And the wise heart doesn't waste time trying to be perfect. Because the wise heart realizes they can never be perfect. So the wise heart doesn't look to themselves. The wise heart will look to the hills from which cometh their help, knowing that all of their help comes from the Lord. The wise heart will realize, I'm not perfect, but there was one who was. And rather than looking to me, I'm going to look to the one who was the embodiment of wisdom. He was wisdom personified. And for our sins, this perfect Savior died on the cross. I'm talking about it was an old rugged cross. This Savior who was perfect had nails shoved in his hands, nails in his feet. They shoved the crown of thorns on his head. And there on that cross, the one who was perfect uttered these words, it is finished. And because it's finished, I can rest in Jesus. Because it's finished, there's nothing I have to add. He said it is finished. And he gave up the ghost. He was dead. Macedonia, I'm telling you, he was dead. He was showing up dead. He was dead all night Friday. He was dead all day Saturday. Oh, but early. I said early. That's why I like waking up every Sunday morning. Because every time we come to church on Sunday, we're remembering the resurrection of our Lord. Every time we come to church on Sunday, we're saying, devil, early Sunday morning. He got up with all power in his hand and touch your neighbor and tell him, look to him, look to him, look to him, look to him. Because life is short.
Preach, Pastor. Preach.
And God is watching.
Good preaching. Good preaching.
So God,
Thank you.
teach us to number our days. Realizing that this life is fleeting, transitory, it's over quick. So help us not to be consumed with temporal things. Help us to be consumed by eternal things. Because if we can be consumed by eternal things, the temporal things will fall into place. There's a saying that I don't like so much. And if I say it one day, I want you to slap me on my hand and say, Pastor, you said that. Oh yeah, that's right, that's right. And it's, don't be so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good.
Yes, all right. Yes.
That's not my favorite saying. You want to know why? It's because if you are heavenly earthly good. The one who was really heavenly minded, I'm talking about really heavenly minded, will be earthly good.
Amen.
And so because life is
Good
short
preaching, Pastor. Good preaching. Thank you.
and God is watching, I don't want to waste time.
Come on now.
I don't want to play.
Right.
I want my heart to grow in wisdom as long as I have breath in this body. Everybody stand to your feet.